Okay, let's kick it off. Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Mantega. I work with NASCA, and I'm going to be moderating today. We've had a series of these climate talks for everyone. I think we've had 10 or 12. They're on our website, all recorded, just as this one will be. These talks are called Climate Talks for Everyone, and they've been really educational. It's great to get them up on our website where people can view them. As I said, my name is Bill Mantega. I'm on the board for NASCA. I'm just moderating today, and today's topic is going to be about cold weather heat pumps. And we're honored to have Marco Alatorre join us. He works for WoodCache Public Benefit Company, which does carbon dioxide removal, and he's their GM for the state of Arizona. He's a climate activist. He's been heavily involved in helping Flagstaff with their climate plan. We're a nice small group today, so I think we'll just let everyone ask questions as they see fit. And let's see. I guess with that, I will kick it over to Marco.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my name is Marco Alatorre. I am a resident of Flagstaff, and I have a cold weather heat pump and know many of the people in NASCA, so they asked me to give a presentation on them here. So thanks for coming. This is going to be about heat pumps, which hopefully by the end of this, you will understand why when it comes time to replace a gas furnace, these are hands down the way to go. One, because they are more affordable, both upfront with the federal incentives that you can now get, as well as to fuel them throughout their lifetimes. Two, they are much more environmentally friendly. And three, they also come with the added benefit of having built-in air conditioning. The only reason you may have heard that this is not the obvious way to go is because they supposedly don't work all that well in cold weather. And while that was true of older style heat pumps, they are now making cold weather specific heat pumps that do just fine, as you can kind of see from this thumbnail over here, where I made a video that we'll watch towards the end here of my own cold weather central heat pump that was working just fine last winter, which was pretty brutal. And yeah, just made a video of it doing its thing during a particularly brutal part of last winter, and they work great. So let's get into it. Whenever I talk about anything that is arguably related to the climate crisis, I always like to start with the why and point out that whenever we do talk about the climate crisis, the vast majority of us are not thinking nearly far enough ahead. A lot of times you'll hear people talking about the effects that we might see from the climate crisis by 2030 or maybe 2050. If anyone is ever talking about the end of the century, the year 2100, it's generally in more vague kind of intangible terms, because the vast majority of us are not going to be here to see that. But it seems to me that even within the climate community, people have not really ever stopped to think about how long today's children are going to be living until. I have two young children that you can see on the right here. My youngest is 4 years old. So in the year 2100, he's going to be 80 years old. Both of my kids are still going to be around in 2100. And we should also be thinking about what kind of world we're leaving for their kids and grandkids. So I just always like to encourage people to be thinking much further into the future. And it's really down to this decade. The choices that we make in the 2020s are really going to determine what kind of world they're living in towards the end of the century and into the next century. If we continue with business as usual, we're going to be more on this right kind of hockey stick pathway here. We absolutely need to bend that curve down to the only one that is remotely acceptable is this green pathway here, where the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere peaks during the 2030s and then actually starts coming back down. If we don't manage to do that, the feedback loops and tipping points that are likely to be tripped could really make things very, very bad. And the only way to bend the curve like that is with systemic changes. I know it can feel frustrating that even if you do everything that you can as an individual, it feels like a drop in the bucket that barely makes any difference. But first of all, every drop in the bucket does count. And second of all, doing that is what instigates the systemic change. I'm actually very hopeful that the Inflation Reduction Act and the federal incentives that you can get for electrifying your home really is the beginning of the systemic change that is going to be needed and create a society that is much more sustainable. And people that are not necessarily trying to do the right thing by the climate all the time are just going to end up in this system that is much more sustainable. And that's what's really going to make the difference. So yeah, I'm excited. This to me at least seems to kind of be the beginning of starting down that right path. So let's talk about heat pumps. A lot of people are a little wary of them because they seem to have the impression that it's a relatively new technology, but it's actually not. At its core, it is the same basic technology as air conditioners, which are at their core the same basic technology as refrigeration, refrigerators, which are obviously a relatively old technology at this point. To get a basic understanding of how this technology works, I thought we could real quick watch a video that explains it pretty well, pretty quickly. So let's do that real quick. Can everybody hear this? Not hearing it?
I don't hear it yet.
Oh. Do you know what I need to do to make it such that people can hear?
So Marco, I think when you go to select which screen to share,
Mm-hmm.
down at the very bottom, there's a strip you can select to share video, and that will make it smoother. I don't know if it'll fix the audio thing or not, but give it a
Okay.
try.
I
So
found it.
unshare and reshare, and then select that as you.
Let's try this.
Yes, got it.
Awesome.
If you're feeling the summer heat, you might be tempted to switch on the machine that makes all your problems go away. Your air conditioner. And the source of that sweet relief? Well, of course, it's chemistry. Air conditioners pull off the seemingly magical feat of making the air inside a home, car, or shopping mall deliciously chilly. Air conditioning, as well as refrigeration, which is the same thing just in a slightly smaller box, relies on the laws of physical chemistry. And PChem tells us that as a liquid evaporates into a gas, it absorbs heat. The molecules in a liquid are held together by weak intermolecular interactions. Not quite chemical bonds, just enough passing attraction to keep them from flying apart. Some of the molecules absorb enough heat energy, in other words, they get moving fast enough, to overcome these intermolecular attractions, escape, and take gaseous form. That's the reason you feel chilly getting out of the shower, and why we sweat to stay cool. The water has to absorb heat to evaporate, and it carries that heat away from you. An air conditioner's basic job then is to use a fluid called a refrigerant that constantly changes from a liquid to a gas and back to a liquid again to move heat from one place, like your sweaty bedroom, to another, outside, where it's already hot and miserable anyway, so who cares? Here's a admittedly very schematicified version of how most AC units work. The liquid refrigerant flows through a series of coils exposed to the air in your home. The refrigerant has a low boiling point, so the heat from the interior air is enough to make it turn into a gas, which means there's now more heat in the refrigerant and less in the air. A fan blows that colder air into your room, or straight into your face. We're not judging. So now your AC has to do two things. Dump the heat absorbed by the refrigerant outside, and two, it has to condense the refrigerant back into a liquid so it can be used again. And to do those things, it uses a compressor to ramp up the pressure on the gaseous refrigerant, so much that it can condense into a liquid again, even though it's at the warmer outside temperature. As it condenses, the refrigerant loses heat to the air around it, which another fan blows outside where it's already all sticky anyway. Which is a neat trick. Boiling something at a low temperature and then condensing it at a high one. Nothing in thermodynamics is free, and the compressor needs energy to do the work of compressing the refrigerant, which may explain your power bill in July. After the refrigerant condenses, the air conditioner backs off the pressure with an expansion valve so that the refrigerant can boil at the lower temperature again, which it does, in a loop, over and over, until your home reaches the temperature you set the thermostat to, or your housemates complain and switch it off because what are you, a polar bear or something? Jeez. While the refrigerant could be practically any substance, there are some chemicals that do the job better than others, and these refrigerants have a checkered history. A refrigerant needs to have a pretty low boiling point, and one that can be adjusted to where you want it by changing the pressure on it. It should also be pretty good at conducting heat and be able to absorb a lot of heat as it boils. And then it needs to be cheap, widely available, and as non-flammable and non-toxic as possible. That all kinda narrows your choices of chemical. Scientists thought they'd found the perfect refrigerant with Freon, which is the trade name of a group of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons. But CFCs are actual murder to the ozone layer. They've been largely replaced with hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs. HFCs don't damage the ozone layer, which is good, but they have a different problem. They're greenhouse gases. So the search is on to phase out HFCs too. Some alternatives? Simple hydrocarbons like these have been approved in the USA. Hydrofluoroolefins like this one are less rough on the climate than HFCs, but also more expensive. The most surprising potential replacement is CO2. CO2 totally works as a refrigerant, and even though it's the literal poster child for greenhouse gases, it's also way less potent than HFCs. Whatever we use in the future, it doesn't seem likely that we'll give up on AC altogether. Not in a scorching summer like this one. Pass the popsicles, would
All right. So, yeah, that's how refrigerators work. That's how air conditioners work. And the way that relates to heat pumps is that a heat pump literally is just an air conditioner that can basically run in reverse. If all of that was a little complicated for you, an easier way to think of it is, again, this all is the same technology as a fridge. So you could, in theory, use a fridge as an air conditioner simply by putting it into a exterior doorway and kind of sealing it in there. If you've ever felt the back of a fridge, there's a fan that's blowing hot air, and the heat in that air comes from absorbing the heat from inside of the fridge, which is why the inside of the fridge is cold. So if you sealed a fridge into an exterior doorway such that the fan was blowing hot air outside, and then you just placed a fan in the open door of the fridge to blow the cold air from the fridge into your home, that's effectively what an air conditioner is. So then basically just imagine flipping that fridge around such that during the winter, the open door is facing outside and the hot air is getting blown into your house. But rather than needing to physically swap which side of the unit is inside and which side is outside, you can just make it such that the system is reversible. And after the compressor compresses the refrigerant, it gets sent inside rather than sending it outside. And if you have an AC that can run in reverse, that is a heater. And that's basically all that there is to old school heat pumps. Granted, those ones didn't work terribly well in colder climates like we have here in Flagstaff, for example. But one of the biggest reasons they didn't work well in colder climates was because condensation is occurring. And so if that condensation is happening when it's below freezing, you can end up with a frozen drain. But that's a relatively easy fix because you simply add a base heater and that prevents the drain from freezing. And then over the last decade, there have been other improvements that have been innovated as well. And now it's gotten to the point where this graph here on the right shows how well my own heat pump works. My heat pump is made by Trane and Mitsubishi working together. And even when it is 5 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees below freezing, it is still working at 100% efficiency. The efficiency does begin dropping off after that, but even if you're at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 45 degrees below zero, it's still guaranteed to be operating at that temperature and still working at something like 75% efficiency. So yeah, these cold weather heat pumps really do work well. You do need to make sure to get a cold weather specific heat pump because the older style is still made. And if you try using one of those non-cold weather specific heat pumps in a cold climate, then yes, it will not work very well. But the cold weather specific ones do great. So the energy usage.
Hey, Marco.
Yeah.
This is Bill. I just wanted to interrupt for a second and ask, would you rather get through it all, or would you like to take questions as your presentation unfolds?
I'm fine with either. Yeah, it doesn't matter to me.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the energy usage of furnaces versus heat pumps. Older versions of furnaces were anywhere from about 56 to 70% efficient, whereas the most up-to-date modern ones can be as much as 98.5% efficient, and getting that from energy.gov. Whereas heat pumps are actually over 100% efficient in most conditions. And a lot of people might say, hey, that's a giant red flag, nothing can be more than 100% efficient and so on. But it's actually true because heat pumps are kind of hacking the system. Explaining why takes a minute, so stick with me here. But basically, it's a little bit hard on the surface to compare the energy usage of a furnace that uses gas versus a heat pump that uses electricity, because generally when we're talking about the energy in gas, we're measuring that in BTUs, as opposed to the energy in electricity is measured in kilowatt hours. So to make an apples to apples comparison, I always like to just use the base unit in the metric system for energy is kilojoules. So imagine you have 100 kilojoules of energy, whether it's gas or electricity. If you're talking about gas, a gas furnace, if you put 100 joules of energy into a gas furnace, how much of that actually gets converted into heat in your home? And you can imagine that if the gas is burning in a perfect combustion reaction, it would be 100% efficient. But first of all, the reactions are not absolutely perfect, every molecule being combusted. And then second of all, you also have to put some electrical energy into a furnace as well. And that does not end up becoming heat in your home. So of the 100 joules of energy that you would put into a furnace, you're only getting about 98.5% of that actually turned into heat in your home. Whereas 100 joules of electricity put into a heat pump is not converted directly into the heat in your home directly. What the energy that you put into a heat pump does is collect the heat from elsewhere and pump it into your home. So again, in most conditions, you can put 100 joules worth of electricity into a heat pump and it can collect, say, 120 joules worth of heat from outside and pump it inside. So by expending that 100 joules of energy, you actually get 120 joules of heat added to your home. So in that sense, comparing it to a furnace, it actually can be over 100% efficient. And then obviously the energy that the furnace is using is fossil fuels, and the energy being used by the heat pump is electricity, which you can get from renewables, like if you have a solar array on your roof. But even if you don't, and it's just being powered by the grid, fortunately, the grid is continuously getting greener. This map here shows the emissions reductions from switching from a furnace to a heat pump. And you can see the worst case scenario in the contiguous 48 states, at least, is still in that 33 to 50% reduction in emissions throughout the lifetime of the heat pump. Here in Arizona, we are in the 67 to 83% reduction in emissions relative to a heat pump, or relative to a furnace. And the two most populous states, California and Texas, are over 83% reduction in emissions by switching to a heat pump. And in a best case scenario, like if you do have solar on your roof, replacing a gas furnace with a heat pump could reduce the climate pollution by up to 93%. And this is coming from rmi.org. You can scan this QR code here and go read all about it. So Obviously, this is just a much better technology. And to get an idea of what the adoption trend of technologies like that look like, there's this innovation S curve that is referred to a lot of the times. And so I like to use digital photography as an example of something that has already gone through this entire S curve. Obviously, photography used to be done with film. And then when digital cameras came along, at first there were the invention of the digital cameras, but it being a new technology, they tend to be a lot more expensive, but some people are willing to pay the premium and be those early adopters. And then as the technology matures and becomes cheaper and more people become interested and see how it is better than the old technology in basically every way, then the early majority will start adopting it. And you can also draw a second curve on here. When a technology is brand new, it does tend to be higher in cost. So if you were to draw the cost curve on here, it would start out pretty high, but then as the technology matures, and then as you get majority of people begin to adopt it and you get the economies of scale, the cost really starts to drop until it plateaus, and it's basically just an inverse S curve relative to this one here.
And Marco, where do you think we are on that curve now?
We are surprisingly far along it, apparently. For heat pumps specifically, according to information that I have on a slide here in a minute, it sounds like we're basically at the halfway point on this hockey stick right here. So we'll see that. But the other thing is that where the cost curve and the adoption curve kind of cross can also be dependent on a couple of other things, like regulation, for example. The fact that we have the Inflation Reduction Act that you can get $10,000 towards a heat pump, that is driving the cost down effectively, which is driving the adoption up faster. The actual cost of the heat pumps themselves is still relatively high, but it is dropping. And with those federal incentives, adoption is happening faster than it normally would have because the price hasn't dropped as far as you would normally see in a relationship like this. So that's great. Again, that's kind of the systemic change that we need. It's very encouraging. And then the other thing that can kind of affect where the adoption curve falls relative to the cost curve is attitudes towards it. Like, for example, induction stoves. Induction stoves are just better than gas stoves, but some people are like emotionally attached to gas stoves. And the gas lobby knows this, and that's why you will see advertisements and lobbying about like, don't take my gas stove away from me type of thing. Because they know that people actually care about cooking on gas as opposed to not caring so much whether the heat in their home is coming from gas versus coming from electricity sort of thing. So that's kind of the inverse scenario where the adoption of induction stoves is kind of lagging behind where it would normally be because of attitudes towards it and lobbying to try and prevent it and that kind of thing. But let's talk about cost. So the cost of a gas furnace. First of all, there are no federal incentives. And secondly, according to Forbes, the national average cost to have a new gas furnace installed, including labor, is about $5,500 and getting pricier. Obviously here in Flagstaff, stuff tends to be a little more expensive. So around here, you'd probably be looking between $6,000 and $7,000 with labor for a new furnace. As compared to a heat pump, you can get $10,000 in federal incentives. And there's not as much data on this from sources like Forbes, but according to anecdotal evidence, which is basically what my own system cost, as well as having talked to several other people that have had cold weather central heat pumps installed in their home in the last couple of years, it seems like the average cost here in Flagstaff is around the $11,000 point. So yes, $11,000 is more expensive than the $5,000 to $6,000, but with the $10,000 in incentives, the out-of-pocket cost is only something like $1,000 compared to the $5,000 to $6,000. And again, it's getting cheaper because as this is being adopted by the mass market and you get those economies of scale, the price is going to continue coming down. There's also local incentives that are available in some areas, like here in Flagstaff, you can get a rebate from the city itself on top of the $10,000 in federal incentives. And then again, these are the upfront costs for having a new one installed. And you also have to consider the lifetime costs of fueling it. Gas stoves are powered by fossil fuels, which are getting pricier, as opposed to the heat pumps that are powered by electricity and renewables, which are getting cheaper. For example, the solar array on my roof effectively powers my heat pump, quote unquote, for free. And I put an asterisk there because you do have to consider some other factors. Basically during this, my home is completely electrified, so I can't really break out the cost of my heat pump specifically, as opposed to all the rest of the electricity in my house to power everything in my house and my electric vehicle as well. But with the solar array that I have on my roof, during the summer, I produce more electricity than I use. And so it literally is free. Using my heat pump as an air conditioner in the summer, I don't have to pay to fuel it at all. During the winter, I do not produce as much electricity as I use, and so I do have to get electricity from the grid. But even during like the coldest months, my average electric bill is between $100 and $150 during those really, really cold months, like right now, January and February type thing. So when you look at an entire year, my annual electricity bill is less than $500. So if you generously say that my heat pump is using 30% of that electricity, it's probably quite a bit less. But still, just being conservative here, if 30% of my electricity usage for my entire home and my vehicle is due to my heat pump, then 30% of that $500-ish annual bill is just a couple $100 a year to run my heat pump, both as an AC in the summer and the heater in the winter, is significantly cheaper than fueling a furnace. According to energy.gov, replacing a furnace with a heat pump can cut your energy bills by about 65%, and the average annual savings is about $557 a year, national average. So again, that's coming from energy.gov. You can scan this QR code here to go see that source. And then where we are in the adoption. Again, according to energy.gov, heat pumps are increasing in popularity, and as of 2020, so this first stat is 4 years old now, over 17 million housing units had them installed in the US, and they already account for more than half of all residential heating equipment sales across the United States. So that's why I was saying that on this curve here, if someone is looking to get a new heater and half of people are buying new furnaces and half of people are buying heat pumps, then that would suggest we are right in the middle of this curve. So farther along it than I had realized, and that's very encouraging to me. We can also look at Europe as an example, where there are about 20 million units installed, and they have avoided about 54 megatons of CO2 emissions, which is roughly equivalent to the emissions of the entire country of Greece. So again, this is where we're starting to get into the systemic change, and it's really exciting. It's no longer feeling like a drop in the bucket. This is having a real effect on the climate, and that's great. So when you're looking at a heat pump, there's a couple of different options. You may have heard of mini splits, where the interior unit is this guy that's just kind of hanging on top of a wall or near the top of a wall. And then the condenser unit is this thing that will be outside. These are great for heating a single room or maybe a zone of your house. So if you have a small house, you might be able to get away with heating and cooling the entire thing with just 2, maybe 3 of these. But if you have a larger house, you would probably need several. And a lot of people just don't like the idea of separate systems. Some people do. If you like having different zones in your house, then this could be a good solution for you. But if you don't particularly like that idea and you want something central, like your central AC or your furnace that's just ducted into the ducts in your house, they also make those, which is what I have. So this is the interior unit known as an air handler, which would just take the place of your old furnace in a closet somewhere, or sometimes they're up in the attic. And then this is the exterior unit. A lot of them do look like this, but they don't necessarily have to, because again, it literally, when it's working as an air conditioner, it is literally the exact same thing as an air conditioner. So some of these exterior compressor units will just look like what you're used to seeing as a air conditioning unit. This is actually the exterior portion of a heat pump, and then it pumps the refrigerant into an air handler that's inside, and that air handler is just plumbed into the ducting of your house, and so all you would see inside is normal vents. So there are situations where you could have a heat pump and it doesn't look any different. On the inside, all you see is the vents, and on the outside, all you see is what appears to be AC, but it actually is heating during the winter as well. So I imagine most people would like to see a cold weather heat pump in action, and that's why I created a video of mine in action. And this video also talks about the federal incentives that you can get for not only heat pumps, but everything that you would need to fully electrify your home. So I figured I would basically wrap up this presentation portion of things by just playing this whole video. It's only about 10 minutes long. The last 4-ish minutes of it are on the heat pump specifically, but I think it's also good to hear about everything else that you can do to electrify your home. So it seems like we've got enough time. We'll only be at about 42-ish minutes when this is done, which should leave some time for questions. So I will just play that real quick. As of 2023, the Inflation Reduction Act is making available $270 billion federal dollars to help cover most of the cost if you want to do like I've already done and reduce your carbon emissions by taking steps to electrify your home and save money on your utilities. I recently finished a complete retrofit of my 1970s home. It's now fully electrified, meaning we don't have a gas bill at all, and all the electric appliances are largely powered by our solar panels, so the energy to power them comes from the sun for free. Taking these steps to reduce our carbon emissions by as much as possible, roughly 57%, saves us so much money each month that we still come out way ahead financially, even after putting roughly $50 a month toward offsetting the remaining 43% of the carbon footprint for my entire family, including my wife and 2 kids. In other words, my family of 4 has achieved carbon neutrality, and we're saving a bunch of money doing it. Granted, my family did invest a significant amount of money to electrify our home over the last several years, but with the billions of dollars now available to help cover most of the cost for others to do the same, I wanted to make a video to help show you how much money you can get to renovate your home and how much more money you'll save each month as a result. The best place to start is at rewiringamerica.org, where they have a tool to help you calculate that number. Link in the video description below. For example, let's say for a homeowner in Los Angeles with a household income of $65,000 a year and a family of 4, they can get $14,000 in upfront discounts covering up to 100% of costs and $5,000 in tax credits for a total of $19,000 in federal incentives. And those upgrades should save them about $1,350 a year on their bills. To help walk you through each step of this and show you what it looks like when it's done, I'm going to use pieces of a video that I made a few months ago giving a tour of my family's fully electrified home, and I, present day Marco, will break in to share what federal incentives are now in place for implementing each of those steps. So let's hand it off to my past self for the tour. My first big project on the path to full electrification was to install this solar array to power everything. I actually did the installation myself. This is just over a 5 kilowatt system, and at the time that cost me roughly $9,000 before getting about 30% of that back as a tax credit. So
so it was just over $6,000 out of pocket, and the savings on my electric bill in the subsequent 4 years has almost paid for the entire system at this point. For most people, it's probably more reasonable to hire a company to do the work, in which case it'll be a decent amount pricier and have a longer payback period, but in virtually every case, getting solar is a solid financial decision that'll end up saving you money in the long run, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. Going back to that tool at rewiringamerica.org, you can see that federal incentive for 30% of solar equipment and installation costs is still in place. This one is in the form of a tax credit, which is better than a tax deduction or exemption, which would only reduce your taxable income. This tax credit actually reduces your tax bill dollar for dollar. By the way, this website has way more information than I can include in this video, like the fact that there's also a 30% tax credit for battery storage with your solar, and if you click on this more info button for rooftop solar, you can learn about how you might actually qualify for an additional 10 or 20% of the cost of your system under certain circumstances. So my next project was to install this 220 volt outlet here in my garage. And we did that when our family first got an electric vehicle, or EV, to be able to charge it here in the garage. That way the vast majority of our transportation would also be powered by solar rather than gasoline. By the way, EVs also have a much lower lifetime cost of ownership. They have so many fewer moving parts underneath the hood rather than all of the stuff that you're used to seeing in a regular car that can break down. It's just an extra trunk. They brake regeneratively, so they basically never need brake jobs, and they don't use oil, so they don't need oil changes. Pretty much the only regular maintenance they need is windshield wiper fluid and new tires every now and then, just like you'd need with any other car. And as far as fueling, I haven't owned this car for quite a year yet, but just in the last 10 months, I have saved over $1,500 relative to what I would have spent on the equivalent amount of gas. And now you can get tax credits for this as well. Up to $1,000 for an EV charger and either $7,500 for a new electric vehicle or $4,000 for a used one. The next big project was replacing our old 40-gallon tank gas-powered water heater with this on-demand electric water heater. And this project I did hire out since I'm not great at plumbing and it required installing this new electric sub-panel over here. And there are new incentives for these things as well. And many of these are in the form of a rebate. So once they're available in late 2023, the discount will be taken right off the bill from your manufacturer or contractor rather than taking it off your tax bill. So if the steps you take toward electrification end up requiring additional capacity for your electric panel, rather than adding a new sub-panel like I did, you can actually get rebates for up to $4,000 toward upgrading to a larger main panel, plus up to $2,500 toward electrical wiring and $1,750 toward an electric heat pump water heater.
I'm going to jump in here for just a second to point out that what I have is an on-demand electric water heater, which uses resistance heating. So again, kind of the same situation as the furnace. It can only be 100% efficient at best, but these heat pump water heaters are again heat pumps, where they're just collecting heat from the ambient air around and then putting it into, rather than the air in your home this time, your water. And so these are great because they can be over 100% efficient, just like the heat pumps we've been talking about. And then second of all, you do still have a tank, which can be a pro or a con. Con maybe because it takes up space, but it can be a huge pro in that you can heat your water. You can choose when to heat your water. So if you have it set up such that it's heating your water during off-peak hours when the electricity is cleanest, when solar and wind are at producing the most electricity, it is effectively acting as a battery because you're using that cleaner, cheaper electricity to heat your water, and then that energy is being stored in your water until it's needed when you take a shower in the evening or whatever the case is. So these are great.
Or there's a $600 tax credit for the electric panel and a $2,000 one for the water heater.
Also, I was mentioning there that you can get the rebate or the tax credit. When I made this video about a year and a half ago, the guidance wasn't super clear, and it seemed like perhaps you were only going to be able to get the rebate or the tax credit and not both, but the guidance has come out since then, and it turns out that you can actually get both. So it's not an either or, it is both. When you hear me saying either or throughout this video, know that that is now out of date and you can get both.
Or there's a $600 tax credit for the electric panel and a $2,000 one for the water heater. We were lucky enough to get this electric washer and dryer with the house, so we didn't need to replace a gas dryer. And there will be a rebate for up to $840 for a heat pump clothes dryer.
Again, heat pump clothes dryer can be over 100% efficient heat pump, just like everything else we've been talking about.
But this is a good one to look at the more info on, because if you already have an electric dryer, you can't get this one. And what percentage of it you're eligible for depends on your income. And then out here, we bought this electric stove, which I do like a lot. It's so much easier to clean than a gas stove. Plus, we don't have an open flame inside our house. My only regret is going with a relatively traditional electric stove. If I'd known about electric induction stoves at the time, I would have gotten one of those instead. If you haven't already seen it, I highly recommend this Climate Town video on the insanity of gas stoves and the brilliance of induction ones here. There will be a rebate for up to $840 for an electric or induction stove, and this is another good one to check out the more info on. So finally, the last project that was just completed a week or so ago was replacing our 3-decade-old gas furnace. But real quick, before I get to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the first step that anyone should take is to try and reduce their use of climate control as much as possible. We keep our thermostat here set a few degrees below perfect comfort during the winter, and just dress warm inside the house and have electric blankets under the fitted sheets and lots of warm blankets and comforters on the beds at night. And then obviously just reverse that kind of logic when it comes to using AC in the summer. And then it's a great idea to have an energy audit done by a professional and implement any suggestions they might give you to better seal and weatherize your home with things like good weather stripping around doors, like you can see here, as well as just more insulation, which is what I'm working on with this stuff back here. There's a tax credit for up to $1,200, or there will be a rebate for up to $1,600 for weatherization. This also seems like the best time to mention that if you decide to take a lot of these steps, there will be another rebate you could potentially qualify for that's up to $8,000 if your retrofits have a modeled energy system savings of 35% or more. But it's important to do your homework because not all of the guidance is out yet, so at this point it's unclear whether this one is going to be available in addition to other rebates and tax credits for individual specific steps or not. For the winter, when we do need supplemental heat, we've now replaced our old gas furnace with this amazing new heat pump. This is the air handler, which took the place of the old furnace, which would roar so loudly every time it turned on. But this guy is practically silent, especially when the door is closed. And like I mentioned, heat pumps simply pump heat from one place to another rather than generating it, so they use far less energy than furnaces. And you might be thinking, what about when it's below freezing outside? Where is the heat coming from then? And the answer is that there's still plenty of thermal energy in what you'd consider cold air.
You're sending out rewards and payouts, but it's a struggle to do it right. Multiple vendors, multiple countries.
This condenser unit out here effectively concentrates the relatively little amount of heat in the outside air and pumps it inside. And in case you've heard that heat pumps don't work well in cold weather in the past, well, that technology has come a long way in recent years, and the new cold weather heat pumps do fantastically. For example, it is currently 17 degrees out with a high of 29 and a low of 9 degrees today. The heat pump is currently running. Good opportunity to show you what it's like. Over the last week, we have gotten over 3 feet of snow. It's barely gotten above freezing in the last week, and like I said, we've gotten somewhere around 3 feet of snow in the last 5-6 days, something like that. Again, it's 17 degrees Fahrenheit right now, so that's, what, 15 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing. And yet, our cold weather heat pump is out here just whirring away, doing perfectly fine. This particular model is still 100% efficient, even at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Recently kicked back on to bring it back up to 65 again, and is having absolutely no trouble doing that. So if you're considering getting a heat pump but worried that it doesn't work well in the cold, rest assured it works just fine. And for this kind of heat pump air conditioner slash heater, there's a tax credit for up to $2,000, but it seems pretty clear that in most circumstances, it'll be better to go with the $8,000 rebate. I am so excited that a retrofit like this should no longer be an expensive fight that is just a drop in the bucket, but instead, as old fossil fuel appliances break down and need replacing, it'll be by far the most affordable option, should be pretty easy as contractors become more familiar with these technologies. That'll be the new standard, and when society as a whole starts transitioning to electrification and renewable power production, it'll become the systemic change that we need to ensure a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. I hope some of this has been helpful for you, and please ask any questions that you have down in the comments, and I'll answer as many as I can. You may also be interested in watching the entire house tour video. I had to cut out a lot of important context to fit it inside this one. And you can subscribe if you want to see future videos like the deep dive.
Sorry. So yeah, that's pretty much what I got. I'll go ahead and stop sharing here, and if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
So Marco, we did have one question in the chat. Connery asked, it seems that CO2 is a superior refrigerant with regard to greenhouse gas effects.
Yes.
Are there any US manufacturers that are using CO2, like Japanese and UK manufacturers?
Not that I am aware of, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't. Like they mentioned in the question there, CO2 is already being used as a refrigerant in some places, and hopefully it won't be too long before it starts getting used as a refrigerant here in the US. And that is actually very exciting because a lot of people think of CO2 as the greenhouse gas, the poster child for greenhouse gases. But compared to HFCs, they are much less potent. If there were to be a leak in your system and your refrigerant were to leak out, if that refrigerant were CO2, that would be equivalent to burning maybe a couple of gallons of gas, as compared to if the HFCs were to leak out of your system, that would have, I believe, like thousands of times more warming potential. They're much more potent greenhouse gases. So the fact that we can use CO2 as a refrigerant is very exciting.
That's great. We had a couple of hands raised. Emma, you want to ask your question?
I actually have several questions, and so I don't know if you want me to give you all the questions to start or do them one by one.
Maybe one at a time.
Okay. I had a mini split installed in my home in 2020 when I moved out here, and it's a pretty big unit because it's an open space and it's heating. Oh, I don't know. I'm guessing there's probably 12 or 1,300 square feet on the upper level, and it's been heating all of that and quite well. I've been quite pleased with it. But my lower level has more rooms in it, and I do not have any heating, or I don't have any venting, any kind of HVAC type of thing. And so I'm wondering about the draw on your electrical panel. If I were to, first of all, how would I do a multi-room? Well, I guess you did kind of explain a multi-room or a full house system. How do you, would that be a much bigger draw on my electrical panel? That's the first question.
It might be. So yeah, if you already have one mini split that's kind of doing one zone of your home and you're just wanting to add another zone of your home, then probably the best thing to do would be a new mini split as opposed to getting a central system that you'd kind of be doubling up on the one zone where you already have it. But that would be an option as well. And yes, there's a decent chance that you may not have enough room left in your existing electrical panel to be adding another very large appliance like that. So it's possible that you would need to upgrade it. But like I mentioned in that video, you can get $4,000, a $4,000 rebate towards which should completely cover the cost of upgrading to a larger main panel.
Okay, and so if I were to go with a mini split downstairs or a heat pump downstairs, would I need to vent the lower level to do that? I'm guessing I would.
I don't think so, because like, let me see if I can actually turn off my background here real quick. Give me 1 second. Okay. The room I'm in actually happens to have a mini split up there, and there's no venting in this. I'm in my in-laws guest house at the moment. You don't have to plumb things into your vents if you don't want to. Mini splits are generally, there's just a unit outside, and the very short run of the refrigerant line goes directly through the wall into the interior unit, and that's just blowing cold air during the summer and hot air during the winter with no need for vents at all.
But if you have multiple rooms, would you have a unit in every room?
Potentially, yes, which is
Okay.
why if you're just starting from scratch, if you don't already have one mini split, probably the best approach, unless you like having different zones, would be to go with a central system that you can plumb into the venting.
Okay, and what kind of maintenance do you recommend?
The exact same type of maintenance that you'd have for an air conditioner. Again, it is literally an air conditioner that can just run in reverse. So I think most AC tech companies recommend just having a checkup once a year. And then if they find anything, just doing whatever it is that they're recommending. But yeah, the maintenance is really no different than with an air conditioner.
I actually use it more as a heat pump than an air conditioner, but okay. And then the remote doesn't seem to match the temperature in the room. Yeah, I have it at something like 62 and it's actually 64 or 65, sometimes warmer in the room. Do you have any
Interesting.
guesses to that?
Not really. The one thing I would mention is that there are many different companies that make these. The one I have is made by Train in partnership with Mitsubishi, but the one that my brother has is made by a company called Gree, and I think there's dozens of manufacturers out there at this point, and each one's probably going to be a little bit different.
Okay, and then the last question, and you may or may not know the answer to this. Do you see the tax credits timing out or getting lower credits in the future years?
I would imagine that best case scenario, they should stay in place for the remainder of this decade and maybe even longer. I would imagine, I can't imagine they're going to be out there indefinitely. 20 years from now, you probably won't be able to get at least rebates this large, I would guess. And the other kind of risk is that if there is a change in administration towards one that is less climate friendly, there's a chance they could just pull the plug on the whole thing at any moment. So vote.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to have Sat ask his question.
Thank you. First question is, Marco, are you still on 200 amp service?
I am, yeah. The sub panel that I had to have added when we put in my on-demand electric resistance water heater was going to overload that. So at the time, there were not these federal incentives in place. And so the cheapest option for me was to add another 100 amp sub panel. But if I were to do the same thing now, I would just upgrade to a larger main panel.
And I know that you cheated because I went and toured your house. And when I asked you where you got your unit, it was your father-in-law.
Yes, my father-in-law, whose house I'm currently in, actually happens to be, he owns his own AC business. So
Right.
I actually didn't have to pay anything out of pocket, but in order to get an idea of what it would have cost if I were just one of his normal customers, I talked to him about it, and it sounds like it would have been around $11,000, which lines up perfectly with my brother had one installed within months of when I did. My neighbor had one installed the year after I did, and it sounds like that's a pretty standard price for Flagstaff specifically, at least. So yeah.
So my question was not to harass you, but I know the Train Mitsubishi, I don't think it's available up here.
Yeah,
that would be, I think
my
they're-
brother and my neighbor both had theirs installed by Cozy Home. So if you are in Flagstaff and looking to have
that's
one of these
Crete.
installed,
Yeah.
I would probably talk to Cozy Home first. I don't know if GREE is the only type of system they're using, but yeah, hopefully as these become more and more common, you'll be able to have a wider choice in not only the manufacturer, but also the company that can install them for you. Like, a decade from now, I would hope at the latest, new furnaces are going to be something of a the heat pumps are definitely going to be the new standard. Furnaces, the installation of new furnaces is going to phase out relatively quickly, I hope.
So my biggest question is, I know a fair amount about this kind of thing. I've been a contractor and a facilities manager, and my head's spinning a little bit about all the elements involved in electrifying a house, which is obviously what we should all be thinking about. We also, Stephen Summers here, and I don't know what he'll have to say, but NASCA is trying to put together a green building climate action team to encourage the transition. It's absolutely necessary if Flagstaff is going to achieve its goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. So my question is, where does a person start? Do you call an electrician? Do you call an HVAC contractor? I mean, we've got stoves, we've got electric hot water for a plumber, we've got the furnace, we've got the dryer. How do we kind of get our head around the complexity of what we're trying to do, especially with someone who really has no knowledge of building science?
I think my recommendation, a good first step for pretty much anyone, is solar. I understand that there are very specific circumstances in which solar might not make sense on your property, but for the vast majority of people, solar is going to make sense. And even if the payback period is more like 15 to 20 years, as opposed to when I installed my own and the payback period was only about 5, and it is fully paid back at this point, I'm just saving tons and tons of money. Solar is always a good place to start, because as you start replacing your gas appliances with electric appliances, they're already going to be running off renewables. So I always think that that's a good first step. I would encourage anyone that doesn't have solar to look into the solar co-op through the City of Flagstaff, where they, in the past few years, have been able to kind of group together a couple hundred homeowners that are all interested in going solar, and then they kind of shop that out to different solar installers and say, hey, if we give you 200 contracts, what kind of bulk discount can you get us? And that's been a great way for a lot of people that I know to have gotten solar. And then as far as replacing individual appliances, there is an argument to be made that there's a carbon footprint associated with the production of anything, and large appliances, like we're talking about, are going to have a relatively large footprint associated with their production. And so it doesn't necessarily make tons of sense to just, like, if you have a brand new gas stove that's going to be lasting another 20, 30 years or whatever, that's probably not the lowest hanging fruit. Just go ahead and continue using that for a while and start replacing the things that actually need replacement. So yeah, I would basically just do it in order of what is going to need replacement first. If your water heater is 12 years old and only has a 15-year life, then yeah, go ahead and start with that one, and then eventually look at replacing anything else as they need replacement.
Mm-hmm. And is anybody doing a combined heat pump for both home heating and cooling and hot water?
Not that I'm aware of, but Cozy Home, I first became aware of Cozy Home because they do energy audits, and they'll figure out where any leaks are, and they'll help you better seal and insulate your home. But it turns out that they're also doing these heat pump installations and whatnot. I've heard lots of great things about Cozy Home. That would probably be
Yeah,
a place to
I've
start.
had them out, and they do a good job.
Yeah.
We've just got a couple minutes left. I want to get to a couple other questions. Felicia, you had your hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good, because before my Zoom wasn't working. As far as insulated windows, I know they've had dual pane windows for a while, but it seems like they're improving. And my home, I just purchased it. Actually, I'm in Colorado now. It's a 97, and the dual pane, I can still feel the cold through it in the wintertime. Do you have any recommendations? Well, I know you had a 1970s house that you retrofitted where there's a single pane, or would you recommend upgrading? And would you go like this as financing south side first, then west, east, whatever?
Yeah, after solar panels, probably the next lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, would be better sealing and weatherizing your home. And so if you have single pane windows, going to double or triple paned windows is definitely going to save you a lot. It's going to require a lot less climate control. So that would be great. I don't have any particular recommendations on like a brand to go with or anything like that. I would just have a window company come out. And again, I think Cozy Home, if they don't do it themselves, might at least be able to point you in the right direction on that one.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think Jim had a question for you as well. It was in the chat. I don't know if you're still there, Jim. You could ask that question too. We'll get to you next, Stefan.
Okay. I think I see. So do any tax credits or incentives apply to the expense of insulating air ducts? Yeah. Is it Electrify America? One second, let me. The website that I was using in that video.
Rewiring?
Yeah, Rewiring America. If you go to rewiringamerica.com, that's where all of that information on the different federal incentives is. And one of the incentives is, I think you can get a couple $1,000s, something like that, for better sealing and weatherizing your home.
Stefan?
Thank you. So question, Marco. I've looked at what the systems you've been talking about are all air to refrigerant cooling and
Air
heating
to air,
systems.
yeah.
And so, yeah, air to air, I guess.
Mhm.
How about air to water systems? So there are some heat pumps that will just have a little bit of refrigerant in the core,
Mhm.
but then they transfer the heat to water, and water actually transfers that heat into the air handler. Would you recommend those as being better than the air to air that we've been talking about, or not? Do you have any idea about those?
I don't have a ton of idea, no. I'm most familiar, obviously, with my understanding is the system that I have is known as air to air. There is the refrigerant kind of in between, but you're collecting heat from the air outside and then you're blowing it into the air inside. I have heard of these air to water systems. I guess I had been under the impression that really what it was is it's collecting heat from the air outside and then creating hot water with it. And then there's like radiant heat flooring type of situation. I know you could do that sort of thing. What you're talking about specifically, I'm not terribly familiar with, but I know there are other options besides air to air. I think those tend from, if I'm remembering correctly from something that I read a while ago, those are not very common in the US, but a little more common in places like Europe and whatnot. So unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about that now.
Well, I guess one advantage is that you have less refrigerant. And so if you get a leak, there's less likelihood of putting a whole bunch of CFCs into the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's true.
And the other thing is that water has high specific heat. And so it is a really good medium for transferring heating or cooling.
Interesting.
But other than that, I don't know how the overall systems rate compared to air.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't either.
Duffy, you had a question?
Right, just a quick comment that an alternative to replacing windows is storm windows.
Good to know.
Yeah. And I don't know if Jim, did you answer those, Marco, the questions in the chat?
Oh, I answered one of them. I just noticed that there's a second one. Do you have any updated info on when the upfront discounts for heat pump installation will become available in Arizona? According to Rewiring America, they were supposed to have been in place by the end of 2023. So I'm hoping that they are in place now. But I also do know that it's up to each state. The states are just getting money from the federal government, and it's up to the states to figure out how to distribute that. So if Arizona is not met that timeline that they were supposed to of the end of 2023, then unfortunately I don't know, and I just would hope that it would be sooner as opposed to later. And I guess check with your state representatives.
Sat, your question?
Thank you. Do you have a list of contractors in town who do both the mini splits and whole house heat pumps?
The
Or
only
is
one
it
that
available?
I know of off the top of my head is Cozy Home. I know does the central. They did my brother's and my neighbor's central cold weather heat pump. I believe they also do mini splits, but I'm not sure. I feel like I've heard that there is one or two other outfits in town that will at least do mini splits, maybe not the central systems though.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
That would be a very useful, and I'm talking with Paul Moore, and he sent me a list of contractors. I didn't get permission from him yet to blast it out, and it may have come from his friend and wife Nina Schmidt at the county. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I'll connect with Nazca on that and see if we can get that worked into the green building climate action team, because that's really important for people who don't know much about how this works. Is finding out who does it saves a lot of time. Thanks.
Yeah, I just saw another question in the chat. Ground source heat pumps are a little more efficient than air heat pumps. Yes, that is true. A lot of times this is referred to as geothermal heating or geothermal heat pumps. If rather than just exposing coils to the air, which does get very cold during the winter, you bury the coils underground where it's warmer than the ambient temperature. Yeah, those apparently can be very efficient, even more efficient than the air-to-air heat pumps. The one major downside is that you have to dig up a bunch of ground. So if you are if your property isn't going to allow you to dig up a bunch of ground to place the coils down in there, then geothermal can be prohibitive for certain properties. But if you've got a property that's going to allow you to do it, I say go for it. That's awesome.
Well, Marco, thanks for a very educational and encouraging talk. What do you think the biggest barriers? I mean, this is all great stuff. And what do you think the biggest barriers to adoption are on all this great stuff?
It seems like a lot of the contractors, people that do installation of air conditioners, who can do an installation of a heat pump just as easily, don't know much about them. I've heard lots of anecdotes from people that they go talk to their AC people, and their AC people say, oh no, don't get a heat pump because they don't work well in cold weather. And while that did used to be true, it's as long as you're getting a cold weather specific heat pump, that is no longer the case. And so it seems like a lot of the people within the industry just need some education about the innovations that have taken place in the last decade or so. I think is probably the biggest hurdle at the moment.
Stefan?
So I recently got 6 bids for putting in heat pumps here in Flagstaff. So there are
wow.
many different installers that are willing to do it. I
Awesome.
don't know how good they all are. But didn't your brother DC put together a list of such contractors while he was working for the city? I thought he had been working on something like that.
When my brother worked at the city, he was in the sustainability office, and one of the things that he did was handle the incentives. Like I said, you can get $10,000 in federal incentives, but in the city of Flagstaff, you can also get I want to say it's at least $1,000, something like that, $1,000 incentive from the city, and he was kind of responsible for giving those out. So it would not surprise me. I don't know for a fact that he did put together a list like that, but I can check with him.
Thank you.
Any last questions for Marco? All right, thanks everybody for attending, and I hope you'll attend future sessions, which you can find on the nasca.org website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.